The cell was cold and silent, a place built to break even the strongest will. Inside it sat a man, thin from hunger, bruised from endless beatings, yet his eyes still burned with fire. He was a human soldier, captured in the middle of a war no one on Earth had ever heard about. The aliens who held him believed he was just another prisoner of war, another weak creature from a small blue planet, but they were wrong. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. Many other prisoners had already given up, their spirits crushed by chains and cruelty. But the humans sat quietly, watching, waiting, learning. The guards thought he was broken, yet every time they looked into his eyes they felt unease. Something about this human was different, something dangerous. He remembered the day he was captured. The battlefield was fire and smoke, ships burned in the sky. He fought until the very last bullet, until he was dragged into the darkness. The aliens wanted him alive, not because he was strong, but because they wanted to study him. They believed humans were fragile, simple, and weak. They believed a cage was enough to erase his will. But in their arrogance, they forgot one truth. Humans never surrender. Every night when the prison went silent, the man would whisper to himself. He whispered names of his fallen comrades. He whispered promises of freedom. He whispered one single vow. I will not die here. Those words gave him strength. Those words kept his heart alive. Rumors spread among the prisoners. They said the human was not afraid of pain. They said he had a secret plan. Some called him insane. Others began to hope again. The aliens laughed at such rumors. Yet even they started to notice strange things. When the human walked through the prison yard, others stood straighter. Others followed his eyes. Without trying, he was becoming a leader, even in chains. One day, an alien guard mocked him. You will die here, human, forgotten by your kind. The man only smiled, a thin, cold smile. He did not speak, he did not fight, but his silence was more powerful than any words. The guard turned away uneasy, as if he had just stared into the eyes of someone who already knew the future. The days grew darker, the punishments harsher, but the human endured. Every scar was a memory, every wound a reminder. He told himself, this is not the end. Something inside him was changing. He was not just surviving, he was preparing. The prison was meant to be his grave, but instead it became his forge. Every beating made him stronger. Every day in chains sharpened his resolve. The aliens thought they had captured a soldier, but what they had really created was something far more dangerous. In the silence of his cell, he closed his eyes and breathed deeply. He saw beyond the walls, beyond the stars. He felt the universe shifting, waiting. He knew his time would come, and when it did, he would not escape alone. He would rise, and others would rise with him. This was not the end of a human prisoner. This was the beginning of a legend, a story of a man who would return not as a victim, not as a slave, but as a commander, carrying with him the strength of both humans and aliens alike. And when that day came, the galaxy would never forget the name of the prisoner of war who became something more. The prison was not just walls of steel and bars of energy, it was a place built to crush hope, to erase identity. Every day was the same, a cycle of hunger, labor, and silence. The aliens who ruled this place believed time itself would break the will of their captives, and for many, it did. The human watched all of this carefully. He saw strong warriors of other worlds reduced to shadows of themselves. He saw mighty creatures, once feared in battle, now crawling for scraps of food. It was a slow death, not of the body, but of the spirit. Yet through it all, he refused to bend. The guards noticed his silence. He did not beg, he did not shout, he did not cry. He carried himself with a strange calm, as if he was waiting for something unseen. The other prisoners whispered about him. Some thought he was a fool who had lost his mind, but others began to wonder if he knew something they did not. Every morning, the prisoners were dragged into the yard. The sky above was always covered in the red clouds of the alien world. It felt as if the heavens themselves were bleeding. The human stood there, eyes scanning everything, the walls, the towers, the guards' movements. He was learning, storing every detail. The guards thought they controlled him, but in truth, he was studying them. Inside the barracks, the air was heavy with despair. Prisoners spoke in broken voices, telling stories of lost homes, lost battles, and lost hope. The human listened, not with pity, but with focus. He began to understand the pain of others. He began to see a truth the guards could not. Despair was powerful, but hope was stronger. If he could spark even a small flame, the prison would no longer belong to the captors. One night, when the guards were gone, he spoke. His voice was low but steady. They think we are weak. They think this is our grave, but they are wrong. Some laughed at him, broken law, dictator of those who no longer believed in anything, but others sat up, their eyes catching the fire in his words. In that moment, something shifted. A whisper of resistance moved through the darkness. The aliens, however, were not blind. They saw the way prisoners looked at the human. They increased punishments. They tried to break him in front of others. They dragged him into the yard, beat him with electric rods. But even as blood ran down his face, he stood tall. His silence screamed louder than any words. The prisoners saw this, and their hearts stirred. In the days that followed, the human began to notice something unexpected. One alien prisoner from a rival species started watching him closely. This alien was larger, stronger, but beaten down by years of chains. One night, their eyes met across the barracks. The alien nodded once, slow and deliberate. It was the first sign of respect. The human understood. This prison was not the end. It was the beginning. Every moment of suffering, every scar, every night in silence was preparing him. He was no longer just a soldier of Earth. He was becoming something else, something that could unite even enemies. The guards still laughed, the chains still held him, but deep inside, a storm was building. The captivity that was meant to destroy him was instead forging him into a leader, and soon the galaxy would see the truth. You cannot cage the human spirit. The days in the prison dragged on like a shadow that never ended, but something was changing, quietly, hidden from the eyes of the guards. The human silence was no longer just survival, it had become a signal. Other prisoners watched him, waiting to see what he would do next. One night, while the barracks were quiet, a figure approached his corner. It was not another human, for he was the only one of his kind here. This was an alien, tall and broad, with scales that once shone bright but now dulled with age and suffering. His eyes glowed faintly in the dark, filled with pain, but also curiosity. For weeks he had been watching the human. Now he decided to speak. "You are not like the others," the alien said softly, his voice deep and heavy. "Why do you still fight inside when there is nothing left to win?" The human looked at him, his face calm but his gaze sharp. "I fight because I choose to, not because they allow me," he replied. The alien studied him in silence, then gave a slow nod. It was the beginning of something the guards could never imagine. In the days that followed, the two exchanged quiet words. They shared stories of battlefields, of lost friends, of betrayal. The alien, once a warrior of a rival empire, had been captured in a war much like the human. They should have been enemies, yet in their suffering they found common ground. Pain did not care about species, and hope spoke the same language across the stars. Other prisoners began to notice. They saw the human and the alien speaking in hushed tones, their heads bent close. Rumors spread like sparks in dry grass. "Are they planning something?" some whispered. The guards also noticed, and they watched carefully. But the human and his new ally hid their words in riddles, in fragments of half-truths. To the guards it looked harmless. To the prisoners, it looked like the first sign of rebellion. At night, when the stars shone faintly through cracks in the prison dome, the human whispered, "We cannot wait for rescue. No one is coming." The alien growled low in agreement. "Then what? Do we die here, chained like beasts?" The human's eyes burned in the dim light. "No, we rise, not as slaves, but as soldiers again." The alien stared at him, almost disbelieving, but something in the human's voice struck him deeply. He had heard many promises in his life, from generals, from kings, from leaders, but never had he heard such certainty from someone broken and starved. This was no ordinary prisoner. This was a spark, waiting to set fire to the galaxy. Soon, small acts of defiance began. A guard found tools missing. Another discovered chains had been tampered with. No one confessed. No one betrayed. The human and the alien were at the center of it, though few knew the details. Every small act was a test, every stolen glance a signal. Hope was returning to the prisoners, slowly, silently, dangerously. The guards grew crueler, punishments harsher, but with every lash, the prisoners looked toward the human. He never bowed his head. He never begged for mercy. And beside him now stood the alien, silent and strong. Two enemies, once divided by war, now united in chains. The irony was not lost on anyone. Even the guards whispered among themselves, "This human is different." The encounter was more than a friendship. It was the birth of something greater, a bond that ignored bloodlines, borders, and species. It was the seed of an alliance that would shake empires. The prisoners could not see it fully yet. The guards could not understand it, but the stars above seemed to know, for in their cold light, two prisoners had found each other, and together they would change the fate of worlds. The prison had always been silent, heavy with despair, but now there was a change in the air, a whisper of rebellion that even the guards could feel. The human and his alien ally spoke less in words and more in glances. Every movement, every step in the yard was part of a bigger plan, a plan too dangerous to speak aloud. The human had been watching the guards for months. He knew their shifts, their routines, the way they grew lazy at certain hours. He noticed which gate opened late, which weapon racks were not locked. To others, these details meant nothing. But to him, they were cracks in the armor of the prison, cracks waiting to be broken open. His alien ally, strong and cunning, provided more than muscle. He knew the weaknesses of their captors. He knew the layout of ships, the design of their machines. Together, they shaped a plan, simple in thought, but deadly in risk. To escape was not only to run, it was to fight their way into the stars. The first move came in the dead of night. The human passed a shard of metal hidden under his sleeve to a prisoner with nimble hands. Chains were cut, one link at a time, the sound hidden beneath the hum of the prison walls. Every night another chain weakened. Every day another piece of the plan grew stronger. The guards sensed unrest. They beat the prisoners harder, starved them longer, but fear no longer ruled the captives. For in the center of them all was the human, calm and unshaken, and beside him stood the scaled alien, silent but ready. The prisoners began to look at them not as fellow captives, but as leaders. At last, the night came when silence broke. The signal was small, a flicker of light, a nod from the human. Then chaos erupted. Chains snapped, fists struck, stolen blades flashed in the dim light. The guards shouted in rage, energy whips cracked through the air, but the prisoners did not fall back. For the first time in years, they fought. The human moved like fire. Every strike was precise, every motion filled with purpose. He grabbed a weapon from a fallen guard and turned it against the captors. His alien ally roared, his strength tearing through armor and steel alike. The barracks that had once echoed with silence now shook with battle cries. The guards tried to regroup, but the prison itself worked against them. Doors left open by careless hands, shadows filled with rebels. The captives swarmed like a tide. Every alien who had once bowed their head now stood tall, all following the unspoken command of the human who led without fear. Blood stained the ground, sparks lit the walls. The prison alarm screamed into the night. Ships stirred in the distance, but the escape was already in motion. The human led his allies toward the docking bay. Every step forward was a war, but the fire in their hearts could not be stopped. As the gates of the prison shattered, the universe itself seemed to hold its breath. The human stood at the front, battered, bloodied, but unbroken. He looked back at the prisoners who now followed him as an army. This was no longer just an escape. This was a rebellion born in chains, a rebellion that would spread beyond these walls, beyond this world. And in the darkness of the stars, the human whispered only one promise. This is not the end. The galaxy thought he was gone. To most, the human prisoner was just another forgotten casualty of war. The Empire believed their prison had swallowed him forever. But months after the Great Escape, whispers began to spread. Strange sightings in the outer systems. Rumors of a man who led alien warriors into battle. At first, no one believed it. How could a single human, a soldier from a minor world, command such loyalty? But then the stories grew louder, more frequent. Entire patrols disappeared, outposts fell in silence, and every survivor spoke of the same thing, a human standing among alien fighters, giving orders like a warlord. One night, the Empire's fleet gathered near a border colony. They expected a raid, another band of pirates. Instead, what arrived shook their very core, a formation of ships, stolen and reforged, glowing like predators in the dark. At the center of them stood the human, no longer a prisoner but a commander. He had not returned alone. The alien who once shared his chains now stood at his side, armored and armed. Behind them, warriors of many species filled the ranks. Enemies who once hated each other now marched under the same banner, and that banner was carried by a human. The Empire's officers laughed at first, a single human leading an army. It sounded like a story for children, but their laughter died quickly when the attack began. The rebel fleet moved with deadly precision. Every strike was calculated, every assault perfectly timed. It was not chaos, it was strategy. The human's voice echoed through the comms. Hit their wings, cut their supply, choke their core. The alien warriors obeyed without hesitation. They had seen him bleed, they had seen him suffer, and now they followed him into fire, not because he was human, but because he was unbreakable. The Empire's ships fell one by one. Colonies once ruled by fear began to rise. With hope, for the first time they saw that the Empire could bleed, and at the heart of it all was the man they had thought long dead. In the chaos of battle, an officer of the Empire stared at the human's image on the screen. His face was scarred, his eyes burned like fire. "This is impossible," the officer whispered. But deep down, he knew the truth. The prisoner had not only survived, he had become something greater. The humans' fleet pulled back after the victory. They did not conquer. They did not enslave. They left behind freedom, a gift more powerful than any weapon. Every colony freed added more voices to his cause. Every world liberated brought new warriors to his side. In hidden corners of the galaxy, people began to speak his name. Some called him the Ghost of Chains. Others called him the Commander of the Forgotten. But to his followers, he was simply the human who never surrendered. The Empire grew restless, their pride wounded. They promised to crush him, to erase his name from history. But in their hearts, fear had already taken root, for they had seen the impossible. A man who entered their prison as a captive had returned with an army, and this was only the beginning. The Empire could not ignore him any longer. The human who had once been their prisoner was now their greatest threat. His fleet grew with every victory. His name carried across the stars. Worlds that had once trembled in silence now looked to him with hope. And so, the Empire prepared for war. On the edge of a shattered moon, the two forces finally met. The Empire unleashed its armada, a sea of warships stretching across the void. Their weapons glowed like suns. Their engines thundered through the dark. They believed sheer numbers would crush the rebellion. But standing at the heart of the smaller fleet was the human, unshaken. Inside his command ship, he looked across the battlefield. His face was calm, but his eyes burned with fire. He spoke into the comms, his voice steady. They think we are weak. They think fear will break us. But today, we show them what it means to fight free. His alien ally, towering and fierce, stood at his side. Warriors of many species waited for his signal, and when his hand dropped, the void erupted. The first clash was like thunder. Blazing beams cut through ships, explosions tore across the stars. The Empire pressed hard, their weapons raining destruction. But the rebels moved like hunters, striking where the enemy was blind. Every maneuver was sharp, every retreat a trap. The human guided them with precision, split the wings, pushed them to the storm line, trapped their core. His commands turned chaos into order. Alien captains obeyed without hesitation. They trusted him more than they had ever trusted their own leaders. Still, the battle was brutal. Ships burned, allies screamed over the comms. Every victory cost blood, every advance demanded sacrifice. The human felt the weight of it, yet he did not falter, for he knew this fight was more than survival. It was destiny. The Empire's flagship loomed in the distance, massive and unyielding. It was the symbol of their power, the heart of their pride. If it stood, the rebellion would always be seen as weak. If it fell, the galaxy would know the Empire could be broken. The human's eyes locked on it. He turned to his ally and spoke. We take that ship, or we lose everything. Without hesitation, the alien roared in agreement. Their fleet pushed forward, cutting through wave after wave. The Empire fought with fury, but the rebels fought with something greater, hope, and hope burned brighter than fear. At last, the rebel ships surrounded the flagship. The human's voice rang out one final command. Fire, all batteries, now! The void lit up with fire. The flagship trembled as explosions ripped through its core. The Empire's proud symbol cracked, split, and finally collapsed into the abyss. Silence fell for a heartbeat. Then the comms erupted in cheers. The battle was won, but the cost was heavy. Wreckage drifted in the void. Heroes lay silent among the stars. The human closed his eyes, breathing the weight of victory and loss. He knew this was not the end. The Empire would return, angrier, stronger. But today, the galaxy had witnessed the impossible. A human prisoner had become the commander of an army, and he had broken the chains of fear. The battle was over. The wreckage of ships floated across the void, glowing faintly like dying stars. The Empire's proud flagship was gone, its shadow torn apart by fire and defiance. Across the galaxy, the story spread faster than light itself. The impossible had happened. A human prisoner had led a fleet to victory against an empire. On the command deck, the human stood in silence. His face was scarred, his armor cracked, his body heavy with exhaustion. But his eyes were alive, sharp and burning with purpose. Around him, alien captains bowed their heads, not in fear, but in respect. He was no longer a stranger, no longer just another soldier from a small world. To them, he was a commander, a leader who had earned their loyalty. The galaxy began to whisper his name. Some called him the Ghost of Chains, others called him the Human Flame. But to his followers, he was simply the one who never surrendered. His story became a spark, spark, and that spark ignited revolts across distant worlds. Every planet that once suffered in silence now raised its voice. Every prisoner who once believed hope was lost now remembered his defiance. The Empire, shaken and furious, swore to destroy him. They sent out warnings, they placed bounties, but their fear betrayed them. They had armies, they had fleets, yet none of it could erase the symbol he had become. For symbols do not die, and legends cannot be chained. The human himself did not seek glory. He did not claim to be a hero. He carried the weight of every life lost, every ally fallen at night. He still whispered the names of his comrades. He still remembered the cold cell where it had all begun. That memory was not his weakness. It was his strength. To the prisoners he freed, he spoke simple words. I was once nothing but a captive, but chains are only as strong as the will that accepts them. We fight not because we are many, we fig. Not because we refuse to kneel. Those words became a promise that spread like fire, and in the corners of the galaxy, people began to rise. Each small victory carried his shadow. Each rebellion carried his voice. The Empire could win battles, but they could no longer win silence. Years later, historians would write about him. Some would argue he was only one man. Others would argue he was the beginning of a new age. But to those who stood beside him, there was no debate. He was the proof that even in the darkest chains, the human spirit cannot be broken. The story ended not with his capture, not with his death, but with his legacy carried into the stars. For long after the battles faded, long after the fleets turned to dust, the tale of the human who returned with alien forces lived on. A tale told in whispers, in songs, in battle cries. A tale that echoed in every soul who dared to resist. He had entered the galaxy as a prisoner of war, but he left it as something far greater. A symbol, a leader, a legend. The man who proved that even one human could change the fate of worlds.